I'm very happy that you are here. And it reminds me of passing of time. I was here 5 years ago in your position, and I think I'm getting old. I think also 5 years is a good time to reevaluate, because that is when I finish my studies, how successful I am maybe in my practice, but not only myself, but with our three guests. So today's topic is how to teach architecture, and we're thinking maybe it's quite anecdotal selection of people, but in fact we all touch the experience of teaching in some way. So I have my notebook in here. You may have read the poster. My name is Milota Sidorová. Recently I was associated with Resite. Since this June I'm mostly doing consultancies, and I'm freelancer for urban projects. We will have here, let's start with the foreign guest, Ahmed, who is actually architect. From Fala Architects. He has one syndrome that I also share, educational promiscuity. So he went through 4 different universities because one wasn't enough. He was mostly based in Switzerland. He experienced some practice in Singapore, and then he decided 2 years ago to move into Porto, where he co-founded Fala Architects. He is also familiar with Bratislava. He's been teaching here, now it's the 3rd time, and he finds it quite exotic. The next in the row is Petra Havelská. I think you are also familiar with her. She's co-founder of Marco and Placemakers, based in London, but mostly nowadays they are also working in Central Europe, Bratislava. She was helpful with project of Obchodná Street. And Petra's diagnosis, she's a communicator, and she's very good in thinking how to actually participate, facilitate design processes for communication, and all the skills that we are missing because we are so focused on materials and technology and architecture in its harder sense. And she's also past year associated with LSI, London School of Architecture, which is a very interesting platform or network of 42 practices which don't even have building, and still it's a school. So students come there and they do practice, and she is a leader or one of associated in one think tank. And the 3rd in a row is maybe the most familiar, Lukáš Šíp, who is actually born, bred, and graduated in this school. He also did his PhD on in experimental architecture, and he's interested in how the way the new technologies are changing architectural expression. I told him it's not a very practical one, but he has also some practical experiences with some workshops, which he co-facilitated with Old Market Hall, where students actually had to design and build models one-to-one. So it was a very changing format based on actually practice. That is where I stop, and I begin with something else, because teaching architecture, I'm going to bring you some examples or some thinking in Czech Republic, in Prague, where I'm now born or based. The fundamental question is, when we speak about teaching architecture, should we be only thinking about university education? I know we are biased. We are sitting at university. We apply for architecture as architects only when we are at university. But recently, I'm hearing more and more these opinions. Architecture is so complex. We have to, it describes set of values of society, individual, and everybody is, using houses. Everybody is drinking water from tubes. Everybody is using public transport. Shouldn't we be thinking about architecture from really early age, like from kindergartens, and how to teach actually kids how to perceive architecture? So when they are grown up, they actually understand the connection. So there is one interesting platform called Architekti ve škole. Ahmed, maybe I can ask you to show this brochure. It's also somewhere here. In Czech Republic, they are trying to create working group within the Ministry of Education and Czech Chamber of Architects to actually start programs for kids in elementary schools and show them how, for example, block is different from urban sprawl, and start to teach values of also the kids. So, and they also made a few steps that should be taken, thinking about architecture from early age. Architecture has to be connected to all subjects at elementary schools in a very practical and popular way. So when somebody is teaching, for example, mathematics or geometry and speaking about cubes or cones, the teacher can also show the building. So kids can associate this, let's say, abstract idea with something very concrete. which is interesting when it brings us to kindergartens and primary schools. We have to select carefully topics, tasks, and formats, for example, for kids and young students, and teachers to highlight connections to architecture. Every subject can really reflect architecture because architecture is a very complex discipline. So it can be arts, when you are drawing, you go out in the city and you draw something. In mathematics, it can be really displayed very, very practically. In physics, also in literature, I mean, think about how many of these buildings have become points for books. Then laws and ethics. So then we come that teachers themselves have to perceive architecture because they are not architects. So now they are trying to develop a program that would combine architects and teachers so the teachers can really speak out the architectural values through their subjects. I also hear these ideas that architects are not very good practitioners, good teachers, and teachers are not very good architects. Maybe we can reflect on this as well. So we need to grow teachers. Then we have to create some specialized local books that could be mathematics, but mathematics in association, for example, with architecture, and also methodology, how to design these books. And also formal institutions like ministries of education, chamber of architects, schools, universities have to include these new books and new teaching methods into their practice. So when we come to the university and application, the person is actually quite aware of physical world outside and the complexity that architecture has. So when we come to university, we are kind of prepared for the complexity of the discipline. And that is maybe where I end now, and where do we have the second mic? The first warming up question, maybe for you, is, because I showed you this today, when was the time when you started to perceive architecture? Maybe it was when you were a child, and maybe why did you decide for this? Can you describe something from early age? It's a question for all of you.
Sorry, the question is that when I started to think about to become an architecture. Well, I don't know. My father has a building company, so probably it was the biggest influence came from him.
It's very practical.
When we are talking about the education of an architect, I think there are two levels of educating in architecture. One of them is subconscious, and the second one is conscious. So when we are talking about subconscious education in architecture, it begins in the early childhood, because as you said that the architecture is all around us, it influences us and it educates us. So, but unconsciously, the people don't even know about it, that the architecture is educating them. And then you have this second level, the conscious education in architecture, and this begins in the moment when you start to think about the built environment that creates the space around you, when you start to think about the elements in the space, how they are connected, what is the relationship between the elements that are creating the space. And this might happen at the university or at some school of architecture, but it may happen even earlier.
And for you?
It's not connected to the
Can you remember your moment of, I'm architect, I'm going to be?
As I said, my father has a building company.
Okay, quite early.
I basically grew up on the construction site. All the other kids, they were going to this cantina at school, but I went to the cantina with all the workers in my father's company, so I learned them all the bad words, But definitely after when I finished the primary school, I knew that I would like to be an engineer or architect. Mm-hmm. The only question was if I go to the gymnasium or I go to technical school.
So it was kind of pre-selected and the subconscious started very early. Okay. Yeah. Petra, how was it for you? Because you had really interesting path like this.
Well, I think just put it simply, I was playing a lot with Lego. I think that's where it started. That's what many architects say. At some point, it was a very conscious decision, but I think that university education is something that I thought about as a platform to give me an idea of an area from which I can go to different directions. And architecture is a study which actually combines science, humanity, and art. And in this sense, I was always very interested in mathematics, but I was not very good at it. But I was always very interested to be challenged and to be kind of like push myself to see if I can do it. But I was also very kind of intuitive, and that's where sort of the art part comes into it. So it was a combination of those things. I was interested in photography, I was interested in art, but yeah, I think Lego was the biggest influence, really.
Thank you. We come to this later because this career path is definitely not linear. Ahmed, how was it for you? Moment of realization?
I don't think there's really one specific moment that was really the starting point for me, but I think I can recall when I was a child. Well, I grew up in Switzerland. I'm very Swiss, but my parents are from Tunisia, so every year or so we would go to Tunisia for a while, and in which buildings are much less, let's say, formally comfortable and right, but have more of there were a lot of other kinds of beauties in them that was very exotic to me in a sense, and I think the contrast and the fact of realizing that buildings are made of the same thing in a way. They're it's also stairs and doors and windows, but all of these things are very different. I think the contrast was very important for me.
Thank you. I would respond, I should be moderator, but I use this as the bridge for the next question. I think my way to landscape architecture was through my teacher of biology, because she always demanded more from us than on a college. So she was always giving us university, like books, and say, you can do more, and we become so inspired. So in a sense, it led me to landscape architecture because it was combination of fresh air, drawing, and botanics or biology, which I loved. And I would be interested maybe to know, did you have some teachers who kind of inspired you, maybe at the university, like who is a good teacher of architecture for you, or what kind of qualities should the teacher of architecture have? You can start here.
Yes, I think there were a few teachers that were very important for me. I could cite names. I think there's Adam Caruso, for example, who was teacher in Zurich. That was a very important teacher for me. A few others in Lausanne. But I think for me the most important thing was always how different all of these professors could be from each other. And I think, the fact that from one teaching to the other, you get, totally different kind of understanding of what architecture is, but you still, it always makes sense to a certain extent. And I think that richness is really what was important for me. So, yes.
Don't know where to start, because there were quite a few people that influenced me, but not all of them were architects or architecture teachers at architecture school. But I think what I found in terms of the learning process at the university inspiring was when people, when you get this relationship with somebody who's teaching you, where you start to feel that perhaps they're also learning something from you. So it's this mutual kind of relationship of respect, which gives you a sense of confidence that you are actually discovering something for yourself rather than just being taught or being told what to do. And I think everybody is quite different in terms of how they react to different teaching methods. And with my sort of fear of mathematics and at the same time wanting to challenge it, I found that when I was at Technical University in Vienna that my diploma supervisor, Wolf Plotek, was very tough. He was somebody who many students actually left his diploma studio after some time, and I sort of pulled through, and at the end of it I discovered that actually he was more nervous about my diploma project than I was, and this was a moment of realization that actually it's not you who is the person who should have the fear. It's actually the mentor who really wants you to do well, and I think this is really encouraging and gives you a lot of confidence
So you speak about confidence and a student-professor relationship more as a partner, not as, let's say, strictly hierarchical.
Yeah.
Still,
yeah.
you were afraid of him, you know, so there is a level of authority that the teacher should maintain. Yes?
There is, but it's a challenge to actually challenge that authority in a positive sense, in a constructive sense, rather than just rebel. And then another person who was really influential for me was Sean Prime at Goldsmiths University, where I actually studied creative entrepreneurship, so it wasn't architecture. This was a few years after I've been already practicing architecture in London, and I felt that architecture practice wasn't really what I imagined when I was studying architecture. So I decided to take this year almost as a sabbatical to basically this course, this master's was about creative entrepreneurship. So it was for people from creative backgrounds who want to learn the skills that actually you don't learn at creative schools. And Sean Prine was somebody who trained people at Nesta, so she trained startup companies and sort of blue chip startup tech companies and people who kind of, become Mark Zuckerberg. And this kind of approach, very personal mentorship approach from her was really encouraging for me to get out of the architecture box, so to say, and was really influential for my path afterwards to become slightly sort of more on the interface between architecture and other professions and interested in enabling and facilitating rather than actually designing buildings. So subconsciously I discovered that even from the start I wasn't so much interested in buildings. I'm much more interested in the process, how they come together and how to actually get the right people in the right place to enable that process.
So both of you mentioned something important. For you it was richness or diversity of, let's say, teachers. And you also mentioned you were influenced by non-architect who actually brought you back into architecture with different colleges. I'm trying to abstract what you are saying right now. Lukáš, who was influential teacher for you and what are the good qualities? You yourself are teacher, so evaluate yourself before I give the floor to them.
Okay, so what are the qualities of a good teacher? Sounds like a simple question, but I think the answer is not so simple. Anyway, and I would like to provoke, but I guess you are asking for my opinion.
Yes.
And I also would like to provoke some discussion. I think that a good teacher is not trying to push or force the students to design the architecture the same way as he would design it. I think that a good teacher is not...
Some comment is waiting.
What did I say? Sorry. So I'm just saying that a good teacher is trying to give the students the opportunity to present their own view on architecture. The good teacher understands them, and a good teacher is trying to encourage and help the student to develop his own view on architecture, his own design methods, his own, let's say, architectural handwriting. This is the first thing. And the second thing, many people think, and many students think, and also many architects think, that if you or somebody is a good architect, then it automatically means that he is going to be a good teacher. But in many cases, this cannot be true. I don't know.
Why?
A good question. Why? I think that a good teacher, he has some experiences in the field of architecture, in his architectural praxis, but he also needs to be able to somehow generalize or criticize his own work. He's not only designing architecture, he is also writing about architecture, writing some essays, books, etc. Take, I don't know, Juhani Palasma, for example. He is a great architect and a great teacher, but he was also writing books about architecture. He was able to criticize his own work because this gives the teacher the ability to submit all the knowledge he gained in the praxis to the students. He needs to be able to somehow generalize his own work, all of his knowledges.
So it's the overview and also not ultimate practice in terms of only creating buildings, but also developing skills for, let's say, writing, expressions, thinking, philosophy. Yeah. So it has to be multidisciplinary.
Yeah, because the schools are usually putting the students and the teachers in the same position, investor and the client. the client and the architect, sorry. But this is not the only position in which an architect in the praxis can be. So there is more. So it's not only about designing good buildings, it's more complex.
Did you have a good teacher or some very influential one? Because they told us.
Well, there was a lot of good teachers at the faculty back when I was studying here, but the biggest influence on me had definitely Professor Špaček. I was in his design studio when I was in the second year, and then in the fourth, fifth, and sixth year, I also did my diploma project in his studio, and after finishing the school, I go to practice, then I went back, and I did my PhD studies in his studio, and we are still friends, we are still cooperating on some projects, so I guess he is my mentor.
So it's different term, teacher and mentor. They are not necessarily the same.
This is not the same.
But there was something really interesting that you mentioned, and it was like a good teacher is not trying to pursue only his way of doing things, but he has to step back and lower his ego. And often we face these studios, especially in Prague, you know, like Jižičná studio, Labu studio, and people go there and they actually become copies of their own teachers because they don't allow them to do anything else. And we end up with Zaha Hadid, where people actually have to pass the test on how to do Zaha Hadid curve because they are not allowed to do even different angles. So maybe what do you think about this star architects teaching, or how should we, you know, like properly design studio? Or what is the ideal studio for you? I mean, you've been shaking your hands quite often, so you can say something.
I mean,
star architects versus, let's say, in studio.
I think that architecture is quite a demanding profession, and when somebody becomes very good at it and very successful also commercially, I think it requires a huge level of control. So these people tend to be very controlling, and I think this is what also Lukáš said. This idea of control actually is not always the best in terms of teaching method, because you need to be able to let the student fail in order for them to learn. And I think this is where I think very good architects, not all of them, because some very good architects are brilliant teachers, but some very good architects find it very difficult to let go because they have to work so hard at making their projects the way that they want them to be, and in the world out there, it's a very demanding task. So,
thank you. Anything to add?
Well, I think there are two questions here. The first one being about why, I mean, should teachers be, let's say, expecting the same architecture as the one they are doing from their students? And I wouldn't be as clear as my friends here about this. I think I'm perfectly fine with a professor expecting you to do exactly what you want, as long as you are able, after that, to think about what you want to do. When I think about the history of architecture, I'm sure that, you know, the fact that Pouillon or Corbusier were learning from Perret didn't make them copies of Perret. So I think there's something where, you know, the moment of the studies, it's perfectly fine to be, you know, just trying to know what the masters are doing in order to then understand your own way of doing things. But the other question is the one about the starification of architecture, which is something else. I think that's a bit the problem these days, is that those people you were mentioning, Zaha Hadid, are not trying to become models anymore. You know, like doing a Zaha Hadid curve is not something that is meant to be reproduced by anybody else, because if you do it, she's probably going to sue you, and it's something that is trademarked in a sense. And same thing for all the other superstars. Like if you do a striped window, Libeskind will sue you and so on. I think the problem is that these superstars, the models these days, I mean, they're not producing models. They're trying to be these people who are ahead and that you are not allowed to follow, in a sense, which is totally different from what, even in the modernism times, you know, they were producing a model that they were expecting people would be reproducing, which is a totally different way of...
Speaking about craft, actually, like they have to have certain craftsman skills in order to develop their own character, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also simply the fact that, you know, nobody is really looking for an architecture that is meant to be reproduced. I think it's a very worthy thing to look for. But those people are not looking for that. I think it's a bit of a problem, but it's something that is more general than just about teaching. Because once you're doing that, you can apply it to teaching. But I mean, I don't know if I'm understandable.
Yes, you are, at least for me. I mean, we have to look at Petržálka, how many reproductions we did. Of course, there's certain mass production that architecture actually does, its production. You wanted to follow with the other thought, because maybe I distracted, or no?
That's it. I mean, of course, then you have good followers and bad followers, but that's not really the point. The point is that, I mean, simply put, like there are people who generate new generations of architects and some who don't. Like there's nobody coming out of Zahadi's office saying, I'm an old person from Zahadi's office, but you have people that come from OMA's office becoming Zahadi. So that's the difference, I think.
Yeah, definitely there's a question of marketing and trademark, and I found it almost anecdotal that somebody is patenting a curve which should be there for 100 years and it becomes old-fashioned, so it's actually mainstream.
And you cannot do a diagram anymore without being, and it's supposedly bad because you're trying to follow someone. I mean, it's
not in university, but in their offices, their own. I'm actually happy that you are mentioning this because it moves us further. And Lukáš, you are a teacher here. Petra, you are also in think tank in the London School of Architecture, and you yourself are flirting between practice and teaching somewhere else. When we are speaking about studio, you mentioned there are different models how to actually run studios. So maybe you can explain how it's this vertical versus polytechnical before we go deeper, or maybe usual practice in here. What are the systems?
If you take a look at the history of education of an architect, or at the universities there are all around the world, you may identify two basic models of educating architects. The first model is based, it's a model that is mostly used by the academies of fine arts. This is what you call the star studios. This model is based on a single atelier or single design studio where the leader is a well-known architect, and in this studio it works as a vertical studio. So you have the students from different years of study inside one studio working on the same project assignment. And the most important thing here is that all the knowledge the students need to design a building, they will gain these abilities and knowledge directly in the studio. So the leader of the studio is teaching them typology, construction materials, structural engineering, etc. And the second model is the polytechnical model. This is the one we have here at the faculty. And in this model you have basically a series of seminars, lectures, classes about the typology, history of architecture and art, etc. And on the other hand, you have a series of design studios. In every studio, you get another teacher, another project assignment, and the student have to go all the way through this system. So these are the two basic models, but they are not the only one. But what I wanted to say is that you asked me, or if you are asking me which one is the best, or
we
no?
Can.
No? Okay.
But there is word tetralemma, which means like there is not only single true, there are more true which are actually not clashing each other. So there is no best solution, but there are certain benefits to each model. So maybe if you can comment
both
first.
of these models have their own positives and negatives, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what kind of model are you using. The concept or the structure of the education doesn't really matter. The most important thing is the content. How are you teaching architecture, the methodology, etc. Because when you are a bad teacher, it doesn't matter if you are having the vertical atelier or not.
I would slightly disagree with you. I mean, I don't know, if you yourself had the time when you said, Jesus, I have 16 different subjects and I have to focus on studio alongside, and why I have to submit this essay here and here for one credit, and then I have... we become overloaded, with subjects. So then, for example, I went to Denmark where we had only one studio which incorporated everything. Suddenly, all this knowledge became, let's say, more natural. So there are certain ways like structure can help the content, I would say. But Petra, can you describe this London School of Economics and this completely, for me it was
London School of
brainstorm.
Architecture.
Yeah. Network system.
Well, London School of Architecture is a completely new school of architecture which started last year, but actually it's indirectly the result of a huge discussion about architecture education in the UK and in London particularly ever since the financial crisis. So in 2008, many architects became unemployed, and there was a huge debate about actually whether the schools are delivering the type of skills and knowledge and education that architects need today, because the role of the architect is changing. And the way it is changing is that quite often the architect no longer is the one who's just waiting for the client to come and say, here's a pot of money and here's the site, can you design a building, a master plan, a structure for me? But very often architects now go out of their way, becoming very entrepreneurial, creating their own projects and creating their own briefs, getting funding, using sites like Kickstarter, sharing resources, working together, studios combining work together. So it's a very networked way of working, and the architect needs to be much more skilled at actually creating those networks, otherwise he will become isolated. And to set up a new school of architecture is actually a very difficult and long process. So Will Hunter, who's the former editor of Architecture Review, who set up the school, had been planning it for several years, and it went through the Architecture Registration Board accreditation and all the sort of nitty-gritty of the administration. But the nuts and bolts of the school are based around a system of a network where students are embedded in practices. So students are working 3 days a week, and then 2 days they have academic work or seminars or studios, basically the school thing. The school has a network of around 40 practices, which are completely different in size, in scale, in the type of work they're doing. So there are huge practices like Alfred Hall Monaghan Morris, who is a 300-strong practice, whereas there are some small practices which just started up a few years ago. And the students are getting very different type of work experience within these practices. The school doesn't actually have a building, so on the 2 days that the students are not within practices, they are moving across a network of spaces which are given in kind by different institutions. So, for example, the Design Museum, Hub Westminster, and various partners that the school brought on board. And what's interesting is that in this process, the students also learn a lot of skills which are not directly the architecture education curriculum. For example, the students didn't have a studio space, so this first year of the school, they actually had to find funding and a protege and a space, somebody who would lend a space for their studio, and they found something in Soho with the help of the faculty of the School of Architecture, but very much of their own making as well in negotiating this process and getting various bits of old furniture from different places across London and actually creating this studio space for themselves, which I think is a process that teaches them a lot of skills that is not, standard curriculum. And yeah, I mean, I can go on forever about this school model, but the bottom line is that it's the first year running now. Our practice is one of the practices which is part of the practice network, and I'm leading the Unstable City think tank in conjunction with Grimshaw. And the think tanks are research think tanks. So again, there's this idea of practice and research and applied research, which means that at the end of the year there will be publication from each think tank, which should attract government bodies or private companies and institutions to develop the research projects further.
This London School of Architecture, is it the university or what is the level of this? You are working like network, there are obviously a lot of benefits in terms of practice, students can stay within the network, so it's much more easier for them to find a job. They have to negotiate, they have to fundraise, they have to do management, which is something which is like going through hell, but then again you are much more experienced. But is this university or?
It's a diploma program, so you could compare it to a master's degree here. So the students are already coming after what in the UK is referred to as part 1. So they already have a BA in architecture. So they're not first year students. So this is the 4th and 5th year students. And a lot of them actually had already worked after their BA degree. So they're students who are actually already very self-driven and entrepreneurial and want to push themselves and are quite independent in what they want to achieve from their education. And the thing in the UK, the education system of architecture has the 3 parts, and after part 1, the BA, usually students take 1 year to work, but sometimes more than 1 year because maybe they don't have enough money to go back to university. And the problem is that then when they come back to do their part 2, so the master's course, they already had been exposed to a lot of practice and a lot of completely different things that actually architecture is about. And it sometimes feels like a step back to sort of traditional school model. So the London School of Architecture is bringing the practice and academia together so that the students can continue their academic development and test ideas, but at the same time, they're very close to practice and they can apply ideas in practice.
I'm happy you mentioned 2 important things. One is a network system and becoming entrepreneurial. I mean, there are studies that part of our generation are freelancers already. And then the huge studios that once were are going down or shrinking down. So there is nothing like, like huge institute or huge studio that would, like there are only a few of them now employing you. So we have to see the job pattern and job market, and we have to be more initiative. And if you think about, for example, level of activism and how public space become an issue, I mean, most of architects are activists out there. So it seems like they don't find job within normal studios, so they create their projects. So this is changing, and then brings us also to the other thing, like practice. Maybe, Lukáš, you've been doing these workshops for Old Market Hall within the studio in here, in this very traditional, let's say, university. How was the response from your bosses when suddenly you didn't have to submit, like just papers and things that go to library, but really students were there? Maybe you can describe the whole process and the outcomes, and maybe how were the reactions?
The studio for the Old Market Hall?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was a standard design studio we did with the students from the 4th year and 4th year of the bachelor study. And we wanted to give the students the opportunity to be a part of the team whose goal is to transform this Old Market Hall building here in Bratislava to a functional public space and vital community center. And this studio was a bit different than the others we had before, mostly because, for many things, but mostly because the students had real investors, and they were not only designing products for the investor, for the client, but they were also a part of the team who was working on the concept of the whole building operation. And communication and presentation was a very important part of the studio. And we wanted to teach the students to the research basics also. And the other thing was that the students don't get any specific assignment, because usually in the design studios you get the specific assignment. This is the plot, and you need to design, I don't know, apartment houses. But it was not that case. So because the students don't have the specific project assignment, they had to create one. So we were teaching them in other kinds of creativity than the formal one. And from the methodological point of view, we were using participatory design, research by design, socially focused research, and also sustainable design. Just to give you an example of how does the result look like, the students had to build their designs in one-to-one scale, or at least a part of these architectural interventions in one-to-one scale. So, for example, one of the students, she designed a greenhouse on the roof of the old market hall, because she started to communicating with the tenants of the leasing space, and one of the tenants, they wanted to operate a cooking school inside the old market hall. So she designed this greenhouse for them so they can grow their own plants on the roof and then use it during the cooking lessons. So she created the assignment for herself, and then she built, of course, a part of the greenhouse in one-to-one scale, so the students were spent a lot of time in the workshop, playing with the different kinds of materials, etc. And about this research, they were experimenting with many kinds of materials, etc. For example, there was a project and the students designed an inflatable acoustic wall because she found out that when there is a concert inside the main hall, the acoustic is very poor. So she designed these inflatable walls, so when you inflate them, you get the better acoustic. And she wanted to build one of these walls, and it wasn't so easy, so she was experimenting with different kind of materials, glues, connection methods, etc. So at the end, every project had this manual, the manual of how to build this. So it was more like a playing with this. Maybe the most important thing was that the results of this studio were not large in the scale, in the physical scale, but they were large in the scope of, or coverage of design methods or design activities. So we were rather designing smaller objects, but focusing more on the design process itself, the process as the result.
Early scratch until the model, let's say, and you mentioned manual, which is also from how to communicate these towards the others.
Yes, we had also an exhibition of the final products in front of the public. There was this market, the Christmas market.
And tell me, with these outcomes, because it's kind of experiment, how were the comments from, let's say, your bosses or from the structure of the university? Will you repeat these models? Can you make really practical studio? Do you think it set precedence?
In practice, it wasn't so easy to have this kind of classes because you, as a teacher and as a student, you spend double time by working on the studio, and of course you need some money.
Could you make case, for example, to the dean, like let's say, if we do this, we have these benefits, and we need twice as much more time, which we can get somewhere else? Did you have this debate? I mean, I know it's at university, but it says the case. We need something instead of something, so we need to change the structure. Did you have this discussion after maybe evaluation of the studio with your bosses?
You mean changing the structure of the design studios itself?
Because you mentioned you need twice as much time, for example, for doing these things, which, for example, we could cut off from some other subjects, for example.
Well, it is not so easy to change the educational model.
Yes, so that's why I'm going to ask you.
The simplest way is that you change the content of your design studio, and this is what I'm trying to do. One of the biggest problem of this faculty is, or the biggest problem of the faculty, is the same as the biggest problem of the whole educational system in Slovakia. They don't have a vision. They don't have a vision because
they don't have a vision.
I have been in this kind of discussions for many times during those past 5 years, and at the end you always end up with a list of problems you have, and there are maybe small problems, and you can change these things immediately. Maybe you have some things you want to change, and it takes a longer period of time, and there are some things that you cannot change without changing the whole system. So, I don't know, for me,
It's good that you said, I think the prototype and maybe over time it can create a really strong, let's say, pressure and the structure can be changed. Maybe the question now, and start with you because you have to wake up now. Board is dead. What do you find maybe currently unnecessary in current architectural curriculum? Let's say, how you be taught? What is missing and what do you think we can skip?
Well, I don't really know about the curriculum that is practiced here a lot, but
So maybe yours.
I mean, we had the feeling that the most important thing in architecture education was what I would call theory of architecture and history of architecture, and all of these things that make you understand what you're doing today as you know, that can give sense to anything new, actually, because if you don't have a theory overspanning the diversity of your teachings, you're a bit lost. And I think to me this was the most important thing in my studies, I would say theory of architecture. Then what is the least necessary? I don't know, but probably anything that actually I think I'm not so interested in all the teachings about, let's say, law or economics and all these things. I think to me they are, you can call them necessary, but if they're not really architecture, to me they're almost, let's say, my ideal is that architecture is a sort of expertise that as an architect you have, and that people come to you to ask for that. And so, of course, now we're at a let's say a transition phase where architects are becoming all these things you were mentioning, where let's say you try to become an entrepreneur and you try to find your own projects and to implement them on your own and to become your own client to a certain extent. But I don't find that very desirable. I don't know. Maybe I will pass by as a conservationist, an old school guy, but
You yourself are entrepreneur, so go ahead.
Yes. But to me, we are purely architects. We're not. I mean, to be perfectly honest, we spend a small percentage of our time, looking into real estate and trying to find opportunities for certain of our clients. But I hate it. It just makes me mad.
It's necessary even in practice. Okay.
It's just.
Okay, so you're saying we have to also keep the expertise. So what is the most, at least, let's say, important, or where?
Well, I think architecture is a very broad profession, and you can do so many different things in architecture. And therefore, I don't think that all the schools of architecture should be the same. And you should choose a school of architecture that best fits your idea of what you want to study to become an architect. So I think there should be a diversity of schools offering slightly different curricula in architecture, and they will attract diverse people, and people who come out of these schools will then create a very diverse profession. So I don't think it is right for everyone to become a social architect, or everyone to become what some people refer to as commercial architect, or a building architect, or urbanist. I think we need to keep the diversity, and in order to keep that, I think that there should be a diversity of schools. But having said that, I think it is important that the schools become much more open to network with the real world. And I think this is something that, at least in the UK, through the crisis has become apparent that there is this disconnection between academia and practice. And I think fostering better connection between schools and practice is a good way to integrate some of the skills that some architecture students want to learn in academia, but which aren't being delivered by the schools, but not necessarily saying that the schools need to deliver them, but actually it can be done through, having guest critics, having people coming from different areas of expertise. I mean, for example, in the research think tanks at the London School of Architecture, there's a requirement to have an expert invited to each of the think tanks, and the expert must be somebody who is not an architect. So people are inviting sociologists, economists, people from politics. So if a think tank is looking, for example, at the housing situation and the housing crisis, they want to speak to people who actually are drawing policies and government policies to implement housing, because if you want to actually solve the housing issue, architecture is not going to do it by itself. So fostering these relationships and these connections between different disciplines, I think is a good way of...
I'm happy you mentioned, you don't say something is important, or you don't mention specifically, but you rather say about symptoms, like there should be diversity of opportunities and networking or link with the real world, and then the student or teacher find the position itself. Anything to add to this from the point of teacher, let's say? What is important, or what should be kept and what should not be kept, maybe in curriculum of architecture here, let's say?
What could be? I'm sorry, there
least
is a very bad acoustic.
Important and last important. Like.
What is important in the
Yes.
education, or?
Yeah, in education in here architectural curriculum in this faculty. I'm speaking Chinese.
What would I take out, and what would I keep? Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, let's take it.
Maybe just coming back to Lukáš's point about, you questioned him about why didn't you change the way the school operates after your studio. I think actually it's interesting to see that the London School of Architecture, I mean, it was easier to set up a new school of architecture rather than to change a school of architecture. I think institutions are very slow-moving, and in this sense, sometimes to implement a change in an institution, by the time you've done it, actually the world has moved somewhere else. So I think that the tactics to do it is much more subversive. So it's not a top-down, okay, let's restructure the school, although this is also something that sometimes needs to be done, but I think it's much more...
Then we come to the pattern that we all share, maybe all of us share, that we can choose different schools, which can be done institutionally through programs like Erasmus. So we go, we travel, we experience few things. And maybe, but I just want to ask you, maybe last personal question, tell us about your first universities, or 5 you went through them. What did you learn in each particular school? I mean, it's obviously quite a high number for changing universities. Like, what, if you can compare them, what did they give you?
Well, so I started my studies in Lausanne in Switzerland, which is a really good school, I think, but let's say it's a lot about a bit the ideal you were describing, where they try to really make every student find its own their own way of doing architecture, in a sense, which I found was quite interesting. Then I moved to Sweden, which was in Gothenburg, actually, which was really about a very, let's say, free way of teaching, where students were allowed to do whatever they wanted in an extremely, it's like students were never judged, in a sense. You could never say anything bad about anything. It was really weird for me. Like I also thought it needed a good dose of cynicism, there was too much good intention to a certain extent. And then I went to Zurich, and inside of Zurich I went to this thing in Singapore. But Zurich is really more of a master's teaching. So you really have, each studio is led by a master that really, people look up to as if it was a half god. And they really try very hard to be as good as him. And that's it. And and so I mean, so they were very different schools, and I don't really have, let's say, one that I think is the best model. But I think we can learn from all of them. I think, in a sense, you know, you can have masters and really try very hard to be as good as them, but for them to do that, it's only good if the masters are extremely good, which is quite rare these days. So yes, that's it. I mean, I think I learned the most from actually going from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. So I think we start to repeat ourselves in terms of diversity, opportunities. There is no best model, but we have to be kind of flexible. So for me, it's a sign that we go to maybe last series of questions, and then I appreciate how perceptive you are. You're not sleeping, but really paying attention, even if it's half of you. So maybe you could, audience, prepare your questions after. You mentioned the link with the real world through networks like academia and practice. You mentioned this magic word mentor, somebody who actually gave me a chance to work with him after. And maybe now, when we finish, you know, like analyzing universities, and let's come to the point when students are finishing and they have to go into practice. What are maybe the steps or other steps that can improve their passage into the reality? Or maybe what was your success story and what should be changed, you know, after university? Should there be something else, or you are thinking about something? Yes, I'm looking at you.
When I finished my studies here at the faculty, I went to the praxis. I was working for some Vienna-based studio. They were mostly, it was a development company, so they were building mostly shopping malls all around Europe, and I was a kind of a corporate architect. And it was a very good experience, by the way. And after 3 years, it was in 2009, because before they opened an office in Bratislava, but in 2009, because of this crisis, they closed the office. And then I started my own architectural studio with my friends. And we started to work mostly on buildings in smaller scales, reconstruction of the interiors, family houses, etc. We built one polyfunctional building, an administrative building, etc. How can the school help the students to get the better chance to get?
Or maybe the early years, you know, after school into reality. Should there be, because you mentioned that you already prepared them through the practice, you know, it's a network. You also mentioned that you maybe had a mentor who actually guided you through the process, allows you to actually use these networks. Is there anything else that maybe university can provide, or should be like easing their path into practice? Maybe some after, you know, like lifelong, like seminars, teachings,
a lot of students,
alumni. I don't know, you know.
A lot of students are working during the master classes, master degree of study. So they are already working in some studios, and after the school they go this way. Or there are some architects from the praxis who teaches here at the faculty. So when there is a good cooperation between the student and the architects, he will take them to his offices. So these are the possibilities. I don't know, maybe the cooperation with the Chamber of Slovak Architects would help.
Yes. Or maybe that brings me maybe to a question like, Ahmed, you are teaching here some workshops, you know, and maybe how many external, let's say, professionals are here on this faculty teaching, you know, so there is connection with the world, not only with Bratislava, for example, external people.
External architects?
In here?
I don't know how many external architects are working at the faculty, but I'm sure that there are some.
He's showing something? Not so big.
One of them is here, and I think, I remember, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 of them. Three
Just shake your hands, or, you know, like say, if you would, for example, would be happy with more, let's say, external architects or non-architects to be external teachers. Would you like this in this university? Let's say yes, no. Somebody shaking head. Yes, over there. 2, 3 people.
I was in Norway a few weeks ago. It's just one idea, and at the Bergen School of Architecture. And they have the same educational model as we have. So it's basically a technical, polytechnical university. Okay, it is a private school, but that means that they get 80% of the money from the government. So it's not like a
Subsidized.
Yeah, and they have two kinds of teachers. One of them are employed for the full time. It was maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 teachers. And the others, they were a part-time employers. And these were the architects who have their own architectural praxis. So for example, 3 days in a week, they are working in their office. And for 2 days, they'll come to the faculty and teaching the students. So it was basically 50-50. So 50% of the employment of the teachers were full-time and 50% were part-time.
Usually, when we were discussing before the lecture or like this debate, that you came here to Bratislava because there were like European grant or European money, and there was this opportunity, and in which university took partnership. So the money were good for you. Now it's not so good. So external people usually don't charge the small money for which the teachers are here and actually practicing something, which links me directly to Main Square, where there was a university strike right now. And part of this thing is like, don't starve the teachers, because they're actually, let's say, our future. But for you, it's the case, like, more external people we have, the more expensive it gets. Okay, maybe I will stop here, because we spoke already for 1 hour. Are there any questions, anything? I mean, like, we try to go there. I think we have to go.
Maybe just one comment, which we didn't mention, and that's actually I was studying my master in Bergen School of Architecture these last 2 years, and previously I was studying bachelor in Academy of Fine Arts in Bratislava. And what was very important in Bergen was that we were learning from each other, and we didn't mention that. We were talking about teachers teaching us, but actually I experienced semester when the task was to reconstruct the cantina, which is the cantina of our school, and we were building it all together. We were 15 students in a group, and we had external professors from Raumlabor, from Berlin, and so they were coming maybe 1 per month or maybe 1 in 2 months. But it was very important for us to collaborate with each other. And we had, what was also for me a very good experience was that I had a few of my classmates, they were carpenters before. So they taught us how to build a wall, how to work with concrete floor, how to reconstruct everything. So I think that is a very important point to say, that we learn from each other. So it's important to put comments to your classmates' projects and not just wait for a comment from teacher. So you should actually discuss everything within the group. That's all.
Yes, I totally agree. I think as a student, you will always learn more from other students than from your professor. This is, I mean, it was almost so obvious to me that I forgot to mention it. But yeah.
I have a question. Lucas, you pointed out like that our society lacks a vision in terms of education. And can you hear me actually? Can you hear me? Okay. If you could be more concrete, like, do you have some, I don't know, some ideas, like, what could we do about it? Or let's just be like totally concrete, like, what could you do about it? Or what could I do about it? Or like anybody in this room, like, do you have some ideas? Or could you like maybe comment more about this topic of the vision that lacks our society? Do you understand or not? No?
I don't know, what can we do? I mean, the government is not as interested in the education as it should be. I don't remember that there was any Ministry of Education who ever mentioned to do some reforms or to somehow change the system or do some evaluation of the system and maybe try to do some changes in the educational system as a whole. I mean, you can do a little changes as a teacher, but we are all architects, right? And when you are designing a building, at the beginning you need to have some kind of basic idea, some kind of concept, and you need to keep this concept in your mind. If you are designing a facade or choosing the color for the interior, you always keep in mind the basic concept. So at the beginning we need to have this kind of concept. This is, I think, is very important.
I think it's already happening, and I think as somebody who's not here so often, I can see changes over time. And I think that sometimes you guys here feel frustrated or feel that things aren't moving ahead as fast as you would like. But I think it's actually happening, you know, just by having a discussion like this, just by you putting the question. 5 years ago, when I was here giving a lecture about a project we did in Kiev in Ukraine, there were no questions from the audience, zero. I mean, either it meant that it was really boring and nobody was really interested to ask anything, or everybody knew everything. But my interpretation was that people felt intimidated to ask because the education as it used to be in Slovakia or in all post-communist countries was very top-down, so it was about learning something and knowing the right answer. But actually higher education and even, you know, primary, secondary school shouldn't be just about, I mean, now we have access to all the information on internet. We don't need to memorize, we don't need to have the right answer, we need to be able to ask the right questions. And I think this is something that's starting to happen at the school here, and I think it will create a bigger movement over time. So I think every one of you can contribute in this process, and ultimately the government, institutions, and sort of the higher level needs to catch up. But I think we can see with, for example, these bottom-up projects in Bratislava, like Stará Tržnica or Dobrý trh, that these projects are the pioneers coming from bottom-up, and the administration and the government is kind of following. And it's this, still at this moment, it's this relationship. But they start to see that some of these models work, and there's a bit by bit more positive collaboration between the two sides. But as I said before, institutions or generally governments and huge sort of bodies take a very long time to change. So I think the only way to do it is to think that every one of you as an individual can actually contribute, and you don't have to save the world, you just carve your own path, and along this path you can meet a few people who will help you. So good luck.
It was nice general overview. I would like to actually add some. This is the problem when we hear also in urban planning or cities, you know, like cities have to have vision, strategy, and only then they can do master plans and blah, blah. So there should be someone who is a leader who is pushing this. So very often the leader who is charismatic enough or strong enough can do something. And I'm also speaking like maybe universities or like schools should also focus on their strongest points, for example, because you also mentioned there should be diversity. Not every school has to be the same. So if you are really good at something, let's invest maybe the maximum into, let's say, this, and let's make it our cutting edge, like a competition point towards the others. And, you know, like public funds are going down. I just heard like there was cut 25% for even universities in Hungary. And Hungary and Slovakia make it, I think, at least of the OECD, you know, like what is it, ranking within this school system and donations. So maybe there will be also this need for funds, need for being like a successful, that will lead us towards what are we really good at and what are we not? So let's leave it to somebody else. Of course, this is public institution, so we cannot prioritize, but we should be more, let's say, proactive in marketing and investing in the quality than just keeping everything the way it was, like 50 years or 20 years. Yes, more questions. But could comment about questions. I hope we didn't stop them. Maybe yes.
I think that's it.
That's it. So I will summarize because I was listening, I was writing notes. So today we tried to maybe only give a short let's say, overview into this. In the end, I want to say like Night of Architecture, not architecture, is also one of good formats that can help also students to come together, do networks, start some relations, not only romantic, but these things matter. And you cannot do this when you are only in studio or outside of studio and focusing on your very small particle of your educational system. It's the network that will drive us. So I'll just repeat something or some good ideas that my mind was able to catch up. One thing that you mentioned, it was when we started like a partnership between student and professor should be, Petra, I think it was you, more like partners, not really necessarily hierarchical one. I also like to thank you for the comment that student and student relationship is also important, the way we speak and we share the knowledge and we actually accelerate ourselves towards some kind of solution. I'm also very grateful for that you said like a good teacher is the one that loses its ego and somehow challenges the students to develop their own skill, but at the same time I'm very thankful for what you say, not the ego should be so small. They also have to learn something that can be reproduced. They have to learn certain skills, certain craft. Not everyone is Da Vinci. Some people will be good in production. So they have to have the basic, and this is also important. Then we actually spoke quite a good deal about new, let's say, changing landscape of job in architecture, people becoming, or architects becoming more entrepreneurial, and not having these huge studios. So we have to combine a lot of skills which are necessary for business, which is tough. But at the same time, Ahmed, you mentioned like I don't like this laws and whatever. I also like to keep my expertise as architect. So there is certain balance. Architecture has to incorporate both, but we have to be, let's say, prepared for this. Then there was this lack of vision we discussed, and I also like this thought that not every school of architecture has to be the same. There are also some structural things that they can enable us to have better or higher quality of education, like programs like Erasmus, external like changes, or sometimes universities cooperating together, sharing teachers, or having joint projects where you actually can meet teachers. So these are all tools that can improve the quality of architecture. And also I like this model that you have in London, like 42, let's say, practices in which students are working, they also are paid, and then it actually entrance into reality, so you can carry on. The other thought, what I have, concept is good. And then there was like, Petra, they are changing and they are asking more questions. They are not, but I think we spoke too much. So once again, thank you for sitting here, being very good audience. Thank Ahmed, Petra, and Lukáš for very thoughtful, almost, I almost start to listen to you the same way that I couldn't ask you questions. So thank you for all your thoughts, and I hope you enjoy the night. Thank you.